Fred, didn't you hear me when I said if you see a ghost girl, do not go to the prom with her? Welcome to another episode of the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo, the podcast where we delve into the mystery of Scooby-Doo media, getting clues from people who helped bring our favorite mystery-solving dog to life on various platforms, and maybe eating some Scooby snacks along the way. I'm your host, Alexa Lawler.
We're just solving mysteries. All the kids are doing it.
No, they're not.
What have you kids done now?
You can call me
Mr. E!
Welcome to the fourth and last episode in this month's Mystery Incorporated theme. It's a little hard to believe that we're already near the end of September. On this episode, we have Victor Cook, who was supervising director on Season 1 and producer on Season 2 of Mystery Incorporated. Victor was also the producer and director on Scooby-Doo Stage Fright and the special episodes released on the 13 Spooky Tales DVD releases. So we go into those topics in the interview as well. Hi, Victor. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. I hope everybody out there is staying safe and healthy.
Definitely. So I like to start off with a quick 3-question trivia game, if you're game.
Okay.
So question 1, in Scooby-Doo Spooky Games, in what city are the World Invitational Games taking place?
Brazil? I hope. It's been a while since I worked on the show, but I think it was Brazil.
It's actually London.
Oh my gosh. I'm mixing up my special. The soccer one's in Brazil. Okay.
And question 2, what is the name of the TV talent competition in Scooby-Doo Stage Fright?
Oh my gosh. I should have prepared for this. I can't remember. It was sort of like an American Idol-esque thing, but I can't remember the name.
Talent Star.
Talent Star, thank you. You get the prize. Oh God, I feel awful.
And last question, in the Mystery Incorporated episode, Where Walks Aphrodite, what does Aphrodite use to hypnotize the town to act like they're in love?
Oh, some sort of I don't remember. Some flower? Was it a flower?
It was, yeah, flowers, the special formula on the flowers.
Oh, thank you. You know, I have to apologize. It's like, it's so intense when you're working on these shows, and then you go on to another show, and then a decade goes by. I was invited to the 20th year anniversary of Disney's Gargoyles panel in Colorado, and I was just a storyboard artist on the show, but they had actors and the producers and the writers, and they're going down the line asking people questions, and they got to me and they said, what's your best memory of storyboarding on the show? And all I could think of was like, oh my God, every episode was gargoyles flying and fighting. I couldn't remember anything specific. So sorry.
No, that's totally understandable. And so to start off the general questions, what's your relationship to Scooby-Doo? Did you grow up watching?
Yes, I'm old enough to have seen the original show when it first came on. Uh, I was probably I was born in the '60s, so I was a kid of the '60s, and so I think the show didn't it premiere in '69 or '70?
69, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been in third grade when that show came out. So yeah, I was a huge Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning cartoon fan back in those days. Johnny Quest, the Herculoids, and Scooby-Doo.
And do you have a favorite personal related memory involving Scooby-Doo at all?
Not from watching the show because that's like loved like the pantheon of all the Hanna-Barbera shows. Back in those days, I gobbled up Hanna-Barbera cartoons and Marvel and DC comics, and also newspaper comic strips. Like Charles Schultz's Peanuts. So and outside of those things, there was a syndicated show called Speed Racer that I was a fan of. So I was just sort of like the whole pile of that stuff I was a huge fan of. My personal memories of Scooby, I think, have more to do when I was working on the show.
And how did you come to work in animation?
How did I get into animation in the first place? I actually did not set out to have a career in animation. I grew up with the idea that I was going to be a cartoonist. I always thought I'd be a cartoonist, but I defined that, and in my imagination and goal was that meant I would either draw comic strips, political cartoons, comic books, or even like greeting cards. I thought I'd be like a print cartoonist because I really admired all those artists. And when I was a kid, my parents didn't really take us to the movies that much, so I didn't really get to go see the latest Disney movie releases. So my cartoons, the animation I saw was on TV, like I mentioned before. And I think one of the reasons why I back then didn't have an interest in pursuing animation is I had read this. There's a biography or a story about Jack Kirby's career, and there was this one little thing I read where one of his first jobs was he was an in-betweener at the Fleischer Studios, which used to do the old Superman cartoons and the Betty Boop cartoons, the old Popeye cartoons. And but he said he hated it. He said it was like a factory job. Like some guy drew this hand on the left, another guy drew the hand on the right, and his job was to draw the hand in the middle, to create that motion of the hand moving. And so I read that and I'm like, God, that doesn't actually sound that fun. And I never sort of like looked into all the other aspects of animation. So growing up, I thought I'd be a print cartoonist. When I was in college, I was in a life drawing class, and we're all sitting around the model and drawing this figure, but I would always like add horns to its head or claws to its hands or bat wings or something. I'd always do something that wasn't there on the model, and luckily my art teacher got a kick out of that, and she had said to me that one of her former students was an animator at Hanna-Barbera, and I should look him up. And I should mention, by the way, that I was at a junior college in Central California, which is like 6 hours north of LA, just a small little sort of almost farm town that had an Air Force base nearby. My dad was in the Air Force. And but because I had read that biography thing of Jack Kirby, I politely took the name of that artist and his number and wrote it down on my book, and I just sort of never intended to call the guy. And this is like 1980 or something like that. So there's no internet or anything like that. So I go to Southern California, I transfer schools, and I'm submitting comic strips to the syndicates. You got to do a month's worth of your comic strips. I did a few of them, and I was working at a local paper as a graphic artist and doing political cartoons once a week. And so after a few years of that and not being syndicated yet, I did think in the back of my mind, maybe I should look that guy up. And I cold called him, and he recommended I take an animation class at the union, the Animation Guild, because it's taught by professionals and they teach you exactly how to create your sample to get a job. And I did it. I never ever met this person, by the way, face to face. It's just so strange. 30 years later, I wish I could look him up and find him because it was great advice. I took that class. 6 months later, I applied to Filmation Studios. They did She-Ra and He-Man, and I got hired to do Brave Star. It was like one of their last shows as an in-betweener and assistant animator. And while there is when I discovered storyboards. They gave me a tour of the studio, and I saw the storyboard department, and it was like 3 panels on a page, and it looked and reminded me of a comic strip, which is one of the things I originally wanted to do. so I thought, hey, I'm gonna try to be a storyboard artist. So I took classes at the union at night while I worked during the day to build up some samples and learn how to storyboard. And then 2 years after I had gotten that job at Filmation, they actually then went out of business after like Brave Star completely flopped and it went out of business. But by then I had storyboard samples and got hired on Alf and Alf Tales. The director of that show was a guy named Kevin Altieri, who later would be one of the 4 directors on Batman the Animated Series. He gave me an opportunity to board on Alf and Alf Tales, and the experience I got on that show gave me also samples that got me hired at Walt Disney TV Animation a couple years later on Tailspin and Darkwing Duck. And I spent 16 years at Disney storyboarding on those shows, Gargoyles, Aladdin, and then got a chance to be a director on 101 Dalmatians in various shows, Buzz Lightyear Star Command, Lilo and Stitch, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, those kind of shows. And then I left for a decade, and I did sort of 4 things in that decade. One was I got to co-develop for TV The Spectacular Spider-Man, and also showrun it with my partner Greg Weisman. And then after that, went on to Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. And then after that, went to Hasbro and sort of reimagined with these writers, Kevin Burke and Doc Wyatt. We reimagined and executive produced Stretch Armstrong and the Flex Fighters. And then as that was ending, I was approached by Disney Junior to work with this creator named Travis Braun on a new show called Tots, which is what I'm doing now. So I hope that wasn't too long of a story.
No, that's perfect. And how do you cross over from being a storyboard artist into directing?
Wow, there's not really any one way that I can think of. All I could say is if you are interested in being a TV animation director, you're most likely going to get there by being a storyboard artist first. I mean, it has happened that people who are designers or have had other responsibilities in animation on the show have crossed over to be episode directors, but it's more likely you're going to be a storyboard artist first and do that and make that transition. But simply being a storyboard artist doesn't mean you're going to be a director, because there's other sort of factors and skills that you find that are needed to be a director. You know, when you're a storyboard artist, you have your storyboard and you're on it for 6 weeks and you're focused only on what you have to do. And you're not assigned anything else until you're done with that storyboard. When you're a director, you're multitasking. You may be launching a storyboard artist on episode 1 while working on your animatic episode 2, while editing episode 3. It's kind of all kind of happening at the same time. You got to keep track of it. So, so I guess when you're storyboarding, they want to make sure you are creatively doing a great job as a filmmaker, and you're funny or dynamic or whatever that show needs. You're able to do that. And then 2, are you reliable? Are you hitting the deadlines? Are you able to do it in the time allotted? And then the third thing is like the quality of, I don't know how they decide this from storyboarding, but like, are you going to be able to multitask? And sometimes that they just have to find out by throwing the board guy into the directing pool to see if they can do it. So for me, how I did it was, and everybody does it a different way, but when I got in at Disney on Tailspin, the showrunner had a pep talk at the start of the season where he said how everybody should learn what everybody else does, that the production assistant should learn what the background painter does, and that the character designer should learn what the storyboard artist does, and that the prop designer should learn what the writers does, and the writer should learn what the production person does, that kind of thing. And I was brand new, and I took it all to heart. I didn't realize later that a lot of the crew were just sort of like rolling their eyes and wanting to get back to work, but I took it to heart, and I go, okay, I'm going to learn what a writer does. And I signed up for a UCLA extension class in animation script writing without any intention or goal of wanting to be a professional writer. I was just really doing to learn about another part of the process. But when you're taking the class, part of the assignment is you do have to generate springboards and premises and scripts, and they want you to do it based on existing shows. Um, and so I I chose Darkwing Duck. I knew that was next coming up at Disney, so I just I'll just do some. I'll make this my class assignment. And but then meanwhile, while I'm at work, I am kind of hearing that Darkwing is part of the Disney Afternoon. They just bought ABC. They had all these episodes they had to make, and I heard some writers and story editors commiserating in the hallway about how they really need to find more stories or more writers because of the big order of shows. So I went and mentioned to one of the story editors, "Hey, I've got some springboards and some story ideas," because I had them from the class, and I pitched them, and they picked one, and then they said, "Okay, you get to freelance one." And I was a storyboard artist on the show at the time. They go, "You get to freelance this script," and and then months and months later, it was no guarantee I'd get the storyboard on my own script, but it worked out that I got to storyboard on my own script. And then after that was all done, the creator of the show, the showrunner and creator of the show, Ted Stones, came knocking on my door, and he was like impressed. I don't think he was necessarily impressed like, wow, this guy wrote a great script. I think he was more impressed that I had the gumption to try to write a script, and that I sold it. And he said, we love you as a storyboard artist, and you writing the script also tells me you understand story in that way too, and those are the qualities I'm looking for in directors here. And that was the beginning of the company thinking of me as a director, and that's how I became a director.
And in your opinion, to be an animation director or any other role, really, do you need to have that artistic ability that you would have as a storyboard artist or a designer?
This has been a little bit of a debate recently on other projects. I think you do, and some of the shows, like up in Canada, for instance, there was like I'd say a good generation, 20, 30 years, uh, they've had their own industry, but they've also done a lot of work for hire for American companies, usually just doing the animation portion of it. And then slowly, maybe, okay, now we're going to do the design portion of it. And so, and it's a lot of it's CG. So you have a lot of people who are great CG animators who might feel like they're ready to be like episode directors. And some people could make an argument that they have the skills needed to do it because that last part of the pipeline, they can make all these adjustments in the CG, in the layout process. I'm more of the old school thought of, okay, if you're going to direct, you do need to be able to storyboard. I mean, you need to be able to put your ideas on paper. You can't really act everything out. If you're talking about a squash and stretch animal doing crazy Tex Avery antics, no human being can stand in front of another person, and you can't physically act that, right? You need to draw what you mean sometimes. And TV moves so fast. Like if you want a dynamic angle, you could hand write the note on a panel. Hey, this needs to be more dynamic, and hopefully your board artist, when he interprets that and does what he thinks is a dynamic angle, you're going to be happy with it. But if you're not, you're going to eventually going to have to like loosely thumbnail in that dynamic angle. So the directors I had could storyboard, and the directors I hire can storyboard, and I just believe the best TV directors come from storyboarding, but there are exceptions that they can come from other areas. So I could be proven wrong sometimes on that, but my preference is they are storyboard artists first.
And for those who maybe don't know, can you describe what the role of a director is?
Yeah, the director's job is to basically visually tell the story. A writer wrote the script, right? But the director is like when you watch any movie or TV, you see a series of close-ups or far shots and camera angles, and does the character walk from here to there, and how do they gesture, all those kind of things. The director has uh, is supposed to steer the ship on that and have the final say on that. So and especially animation with the acting, it's like how they physically act or move or stand. That's going to be the director's job. The camera angles. Um, the places where the script isn't as descriptive, like if it's an action sequence, a chase sequence, or a gag sequence, there'll be something written there to kind of get that started, or maybe it will be super descriptive, but a director may feel there's a different or better or more exciting or fun way to do it, and they have to dream that up. Or song sequences, for instance. Like there's some loose idea of what it's going to be, but until you get in there and just start listening to the song and making up what you're going to see, um, that's the director's job.
And conversely, what is the role of a producer?
Well, it really depends on where they came up from. So on a lot of shows I'm on, there's usually at least three people that have a producer title. One person who has that is really all about the schedules and the budgets and making sure all that's going to flow. Okay. But if it's someone like me, then one of the producers is somebody who's come up from a directing and background of sort of the nuts and bolts of how to put the show together. And the other producer is usually came up from being a writer. And together, their job is to sort of show run the show. So I just described what a director does. A producer would usually then, the director's job usually goes until the storyboard ships to animation. And I'd say in a lot of cases, his job may finish at that point. And then it's the producer with the director background that would take it over from then in terms of retakes, communicating to the animators, and then also editing, sound effects, music. All the producers together weigh in when we're casting the show, when we're choosing the actors, and all the producers together also weighing in on what kind of music style do we want, what composer we're going to hire, and also spotting each and every episode with the composer. Um, and then the producers then are at the final mix, giving notes about adjusting sound levels, sound effects, music, all that stuff. And they kind of sign off on the show, you know. And I should go back in time before the director does anything. The producers are developing the show. They're developing it from who the characters are, what the storylines are going to be, and then on my side of it, uh, the art of it, like what's it going to look like, what is the filmmaking style of the show.
And what is the difference when you're working on a project in maybe both roles as opposed to working in just one or the other?
Well, there's a lot of crossover. I would say on Scooby and Hasbro, it really was almost an intertwined role, because I was a supervising director and a producer on those shows, that my hands were really in the weeds of all of it, like really getting into there, almost like an episode director sometimes, and redrawing and restaging and sort of thumbnailing sequences and things like that. On my current show, we have a supervising director, and he really does all that. So I can take a step back and sort of take a broader view and kind of just like step in sometimes on what he does. But because he's so good at covering all that, it really gives me breathing room to kind of see the whole thing and make sure everything is happening when it needs to happen and working how it needs to work, and I can focus on speaking to the animators and that. So that's the difference. If you're doing both, like if you're being a supervising director and you have this producer title, you're really you're up to your eyeballs at work. If you are properly crewed and you're an executive producer, and like say on the writing side, you're an executive producer but have a story editor under you, that gives you more breathing room to oversee the whole show. So the same thing on the visual side. If you have a supervising director under you, it lets you kind of have a step back and have a broader view of the show.
And are there any challenges to having both roles? Like, does the project either suffer or benefit from having one person in both roles?
I think the main difference is time. Uh, when you're doing both roles, you are potentially going to be working evenings and weekends, and I think you do run the risk of a burnout if the show isn't budgeted to to have those extra roles. So you know, I feel like we are so blessedly budgeted for the show I'm working on now. It's great.
And moving more towards Scooby, how did you come to work on Mystery Incorporated?
So before that show, I was on the Spectacular Spider-Man, and my line producer Wade Wazinski uh, rolled off the show before me, and he landed at Warner Brothers on Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated as its line producer, and he just contacted me and said, "Hey, they're looking for a couple of directors on the show," and he introduced me to the supervising director. I'm sorry, the supervising producer, Tony Cervoni, and we hit it off, and he decided to bring me aboard. I met him and Mitch Watson, and they brought me aboard as a director. And Tony was also simultaneously producing another show. And about, I'd say maybe 4 weeks into the job, he asked me if I would want to step up and be the supervising director on Scooby. And I said, of course. And then after that season, they asked me to produce the second season.
And what was it like to come into a darker, overarching story as your first experience working on Scooby?
Well, I loved it. Like, we mentioned before, I remember the original show, but in those days, as I said, I was a huge fan of the Hanna-Barbera action shows like Johnny Quest, Herculoids, and those kind of shows. And so this new, darker approach to me kind of, it made it more dramatic. It made it more grounded for me, which kind of was more my sensibility. And especially after coming off the Spectacular Spider-Man, it just seemed like a perfect fit to go into a Scooby like this that had a big storyline that continued over 2 seasons, and there was backstory to the character and lore, and the characters' personalities were fleshed out. It just seemed like it fit me more to do this type of a Scooby. So I feel very fortunate that it all worked out that way.
And can you explain what maybe the day-to-day experience was like working on Mystery Incorporated?
Oh my gosh. Well, let me try to remember. I couldn't remember those specific questions you asked me at the top, but I do remember it day to day being a super pleasant experience. It was also an example of a show that was very well thought out schedule wise. We were able to sort of handle the demands of the art directing and the staging because of just how it was scheduled out. It wasn't all on top of each other what we had to do. So that I think also made it fun to do. What I remember, this isn't like a day to day thing, but like what I remember when I first came on the show was how eclectic the crew seemed to me, especially when you would tell people you're on Scooby-Doo. Everybody thought, prior to Mystery Incorporated, every Scooby-Doo was people had an idea of that kind of that original show, but just updated, right? And I think most people in our business thought a certain we have people who sort of specialize in different genres in this business, like the funny cartoon guy or the primetime cartoon guy or the action show guy. And there's a lot of people who pride themselves and they could sort of step in and do any of those roles. But I think Scooby was in the camp of up until that point of this is only comedy people work on the show. So I get on the show and I'm watching this crew get put together. So besides me, who just came off the Spectacular Spider-Man, they hired Kurt Gaeta, who was like one of the top DC Universe superhero directors at Warner Brothers. Batman Beyond, all those shows. He was on the show directing, and then they brought in this art director, Rob Kral, who came off Samurai Jack. Oh, excuse me, I misspoke. I meant to say Dan Kral was our art director. Rob Kral was our fantastic composer.
Scooby-Doo!
And it was just Derek Wyatt, who also designed Transformers. So it was like these kind of eclectic mix of sort of stylized action shows, comedy shows, all on the show. And it had all made sense because, besides story-wise, it being a more serious tone with an overarching story, filmmaking-wise, we were going to do it like mini movies. If you think back to the original show, and I think mostly because of the limitations of animation at the time, the original show was very left to right and kind of flat. It wasn't that dimensional. But we were going to have up shots, down shots, like any angle you'd see in any horror movie or any action movie. And also, the show was going to still have comedy and be funny, but more in the sense of like, I guess like Ghostbusters, where it's kind of rooted in, the scary moments are really scary. You know what I mean? And anyway, I may have gone off track a little bit, but I just remember it was an eclectic crew that came together to really make this very different sort of a Scooby.
With people coming from all different backgrounds, how did that bump up the quality of the show?
It worked out surprisingly well because, like, Kurt and I, and the storyboard artists, we just like, the sensibility was like, okay, we're gonna stage this as if we're on an action show, right? As if this were a movie. We're not staging this like a comedy left to right show. We're going to do this like a movie. Meanwhile, the background painters are doing these super stylized paintings that aren't necessarily realistic. They're very artistic and stylized. And with the cinematic quality of a sequence would have a certain color, like this sequence is green or this sequence is blue or whatever it's going to be. So you put those two things together, it was like really something different. It was great.
And what was it like to be able to play with those horror aspects with a lot of the, calling to other different horror movies within the show?
It was fun. It was fun. We were a lot of us were fans of these movies, and it was a lot of fun to do. There was an episode I remember directing. I think it was called Mecha Mutt. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and Mitch Watson, I know, was riffing off certain horror things, but for me, when Scooby had to battle the Mecha Mutt, I in my head was thinking of Alien. I think it was Alien 2 when Ripley got into that pallet mover thing, was fighting the alien, and so I made Scooby get into that. So working on the show kind of sometimes would like spark you to remember things of other horror movies and kind of try to put them in.
Awesome. And moving to the special episode shorts like Spooky Games, Haunted Holidays, I think there were 6 of them. Can you speak to how those came to be?
Well, I gotta say, in terms of how it came to me, they were already planned and developed. Like I had no idea of them. I should say until they actually said, Vic, we'd like to see if you want to do these. I mean, I was on Mystery Incorporated and enmeshed in Mystery Incorporated, but as we were going into only post-production on the final season, I was approached and they said, hey, we have this feature-length DVD and sort of this sort of handful of these 30-minute specials, and we'd like you to do them. And I took a look at them and I thought, sure, I'd love to do them. But they sort of had nothing to do with Mystery Incorporated. It was outside of our show in terms of storylines and in terms of art direction. Those shows were developed, I would say, by Alan Burnett, who, before he retired in recent years, was the co-producer of all the Scooby DVDs and specials. And his background, he was a writer, and so he would work with different writers um, on all the various specials. So, like I said, by the time it came to me, the scripts were done, and my input was more after the scripts were done. Um, but it was just really as simple as they had them and they needed somebody to do them, and they just asked me if I'd like to do them, and I said sure.
And can you speak to the development process from when you came in to when they were realized?
Well, like I said, story wise, they were already developed. But for me, it was like, okay, what is this monster going to look like? What are the powers? So in the Christmas one, I really thought it would be really cool if um, this snow creature uh, could have sort of morphing abilities. And I started sketching out these different sort of like almost like Sandman morphing abilities, and I bounced it off of Alan, and he loved it, and put it in. So, like I said, the stories may work out, but I look at the monsters like, okay, what can we do to to make it scarier or more monstrous rather than just a guy in a suit? And we would somehow if the script would somehow explain in some pseudoscience way how the snowsuit was able to do it, but it was just like an excuse to have those visuals to make it extra cooler. Um, but design wise, it was really just based on the original EY Tokomoto designs from 1969, 1970, just done today, you know. And we would storyboard it like it was today, but design wise, the aesthetic was the original show for those specials.
And in your mind, were you thinking of them like an extension of the original show, or was it more like a mini movie?
Well, my real uh, how do I say this? I love Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. That's my Scooby, right? That's the one I was on, and had that rich lore. The other Scoobies always seem to be standalone adventures. Even though there'd be a whole series about it, it's like they never talked really about that much about what just happened in the last episode, and what they were doing now didn't necessarily connect to future episodes. I'm talking about the original show. And so to me, at least at that time, the specials also story wise didn't seem to connect to each other at all. They were just standalone adventures. It was like, here's Scooby and the gang in this situation or this mystery to solve. Um, so it maybe Alan and the writers it connected for them, but for me they seem like standalone adventures, unlike how Mr. Incorporated was done.
And out of all the specials, did you have a favorite?
Hmm. I think I like the Christmas special.
And why?
Just what I talked about, the snow creature. That was fun to do. That was a fun one. I liked the one, I can't remember the name, but it was at a hotel on a beach. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I think it's called the Beach Beastie.
Yeah. So I the thing that was kind of fun about that is we had Adam West, and when I was a kid, I was such a Batman fan, so it was just fun to have him to be able to work with him. It was one of his last few projects. Um, so I say those two of those were fun to do. Stage Fright wasn't a 30-minute special; it was a feature length uh, DVD, and that was also really fun to do. And one of the most fun things to do actually was the main title sequence of it, because we just sort of went off and did a completely different stylized version of all the characters. And um, I've always loved that main title sequence. I kind of hope one day maybe they'd consider making a show based off those designs. I thought that those designs turned out great. They were designed by Steve Silver, who was the Kim Possible character designer.
And moving to talk about stage fright a little bit more, what was it like to play with the Fred and Daphne dynamic in that movie too?
that was fun. That's one of those things that's like built into, I guess, the lore of Scooby. You know, it didn't really it wasn't like a continuation necessarily of an arc from any other DVDs to this DVD or after it. It's sort of, to me, it's like the ongoing Superman Lois Lane kind of thing. That's just part of what Scooby is about, is their relationship. But it was fun to do. It was definitely fun to do.
And moving back to talk about the opening title sequence, what was it like to be able to, play with a different style within the classic kind of style of the movie?
Well, that was really fun. Especially when we were on Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated. You know, it is a stylized take. Also, it's more angular. Derek White did a fantastic job of, you look at the Mystery Incorporated designs, and yes, you recognize those characters are very reminiscent of the E.Y. Takamoto designs, but when you really, really look at them, there's like these angles, and he just angled them the right way, and kind of the proportions, and made them even more animatable. I mean, we hardly had any off-model issues in animation with this. So, and the background style also being non-traditional. So, working on Mystery Incorporated, it's like, God, I just love this idea of how you can reimagine this franchise and these characters in these different art styles. So when you do the specials and the DVDs, you really don't get that opportunity. At least at that time, you don't get that opportunity. The style is to be the original style, but the main title is the spot where you can play. So yes, it was super, super fun. And like I said earlier, it's like after we were done, I'm like, man, that'd make a great series if they did it that way. So it was very fun.
And what was your favorite part about getting to work on a handful of, vastly different Scooby projects?
Just to see the scope of them, it's like, to at a very close proximity of time, I'm working on a Scooby that, oh, these designs are EY Takamoto designs, and then literally within the same week, this new designs and a new and a more modern sensibility, and then also that the main title sequence. So it was just fun to get to play and see how the these characters and this premise and this idea of Scooby Doo works so well in so many different art styles.
And did you find any challenges working on Scooby at all?
Well, it was actually not really. I mean, just the usual challenges of you want to make it great, and you have X amount of time to do it, and you're just racing the clock to make it great. But I don't think there was like any extraordinary challenges. The crew. This was a top tier crew on Mr. Incorporated. Everybody was like at the top of their game, so it just made everybody's job just that much smoother and easier, because you weren't having to help pick somebody else up, because everybody was so great. The other directors, the producers, the writers, the supervising producers, the art crew, the actors, even our exec who was on our show. I shouldn't say even our exec, but the exec on our show. He was so great and pleasant, and had great ideas too, with the notes he gave. Just like all around, it's like if you're on a basketball team and you're the only one who can play, and everybody else is sort of like has their arm tied behind their back, it's going to be difficult for you. But this was like you're playing where everybody is, they're like Magic Johnson, they're experts, so it made it pretty fun and easy to work on.
And do you have a specific episode of Mystery Incorporated or one of the specials or the movie that you're the most proud of?
There's quite a few, like the first episode, which was directed by Kurt. I just loved the way that turned out. That was awesome. I really liked the Dynamite episode um, with the Blue Falcon. That was really fun. And I like our two season finales. You know, those, All Fear the Freak, and then our season 2 finale. Those were great. Uh, I love the twists and turns that Fred had to endure in the show, of thinking the mayor was his dad, then finding out that he's not, and that his real dad is not such a good guy. It's like so many cool things about the show.
And what was it like to come to work on a show that you had grown up watching?
Fun. I couldn't wait to get to work every day. It was a blast. And like I said, a lot of it also had to do with the crew. And besides them being such experts and professionals and good at their job, they were just like a fun bunch of people to work with. The nicest people you'd want to work with.
And why do you think that a cartoon about a mystery solving dog has held up for over 50 years now?
Well, I will repeat something that Tony Cervoni told me, and I think this is the key: fear, food, and flashlights. I think that's the reason for the success of the Scooby-Doo show. Is you combine those elements in just the right way of drama and comedy and fear, uh, you're gonna have a hit.
I think that covers all of the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at all?
About Mr. Incorporated? No, that was good.
Perfect. And just before we end here, do you have any recent projects you'd like to promote or social media channels where people can get in touch with you?
People can follow me on Twitter, Victor underscore Cook one, the number one, not spelled out one. So Victor underscore Cook one. You can follow me there. I mostly post stuff about the show I'm working on now, which is Tots, and I'll do Throwback Thursday stuff uh, of the past shows I've worked on, like Mr. Incorporated or Spider Man. And as far as besides Disney Junior's Tots, which is current, there's also a show on Netflix called Stretch Armstrong and the Flex Fighters that's still on Netflix that I think people would get a kick out of watching if they decided to check it out.
Perfect. Well, I think that covers everything. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
It was a good time. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that concludes today's episode. Another huge thank you to Victor Cook for taking the time out to chat with me. For more groovy content, be sure to check at Unmasked SD on Twitter, at Unmasked SD Podcast on Instagram, or at unmaskedsdpodcast.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook under the Unmasked History of Scooby-Doo podcast. If you like this episode and want to hear more, also make sure to check those social media channels or the website. Or you can listen to older episodes wherever you like to get your podcast fix. And if you want to follow Victor, you can find him on Twitter at Victor_Cook1. Thanks for listening, and keep an ear out for the next episode. Scooby-Dooby-Doo!